To say that the majority of Marvel fans are detail-oriented is an understatement. We're always desperate to know what's going to happen next in the MCU, especially in the aftermath of the decimation which took place during Infinity War. Now that we know Doctor Strange was right and we're really in the Endgame, let's see what clues we should have seen all along in our favorite Marvel movies. The great writer William Shakespeare once asked, "What's in a name?" Well, to be honest, if you're a Marvel fan, not much. While Marvel movie titles may be references to the comic books, there's usually only a really loose connection, if any, between them. Still, we can't stop grasping for any straws possible, so as soon as Avengers Infinity War wrapped up, we were desperate to know what the fourth Avengers movie would be called. There were a lot of false flags, and for a while, the rumor was that the movie would be called Avengers Annihilation, which of course made us think of the comic books, the villain Annihilus, and a whole host of other things that were ultimately incorrect. Then, when the movie trailer for the fourth Avengers movie finally dropped, we learned that the name of the movie is Endgame. Maybe a little anticlimactic, but really, we should have seen it coming. There were plenty of hints in the MCU over the years that Endgame would be, well, the name of the game. Although he's not technically an Avenger, Doctor Strange was a hugely important part of Avengers Infinity War. After all, in his titular movie, Doctor Strange learned to master the Eye of Agamotto, which contains the Time Stone. Mastering an Infinity Stone is no easy feat, and this one seems particularly useful in battle. During Infinity War, Doctor Strange told Tony Stark that he was willing to protect the Time Stone at all costs, even if it meant letting Tony and Peter Parker die. Pretty harsh, but at least the guy's honest. Later, Doctor Strange takes a peek at some 14 million odd futures across the multiverse and comes back with some bad news. There was only one single scenario in which they defeated Thanos, making the Mad Titan's victory seem like a sure thing. But even after his vision, when push came to shove, Strange ended up trading the Time Stone for Thanos, sparing Tony Stark. This was a big gamble, because Thanos could have just taken the stone and then crushed Tony, or Tony could have disappeared after the decimation. After Thanos takes the Time Stone, Doctor Strange remarks to Tony, "We're in the Endgame now." There was a lot going on at this time, so these words didn't strike us as overly odd on the first watch, but why would he say that they're in the Endgame now as opposed to the entire rest of the movie when they were desperately trying to stop Thanos from acquiring the Infinity Stones? What was all that if not the Endgame? Before he disappears, Doctor Strange tells Tony that there was no other way. Apparently, the fun didn't really get started until Thanos collected all of the Infinity Stones, and things are about to get real during Avengers Endgame. This isn't the first time we've heard a character talk about the Endgame in the MCU either. During Avengers Age of Ultron, we learned that the Battle of New York was a game changer as far as our heroes were concerned. It's safe to say the average citizen of New York was terrified when aliens started smashing up their city, but the event left our heroes pretty shaken too. Tony reveals that he'd been working on Ultron because that battle had been a huge wake-up call about just how crazy things could get and how ill-equipped even Iron Man is to deal with it. It's kind of ironic, and we're sure it's not a coincidence that the hero who was so scared of space is now stuck up there during the trailer for Endgame. When Tony is explaining his fears and limitations to his fellow Avengers, he says, "That up there, that's the Endgame. How are you guys planning on beating that?" And it turns out that Tony was right. The Endgame is coming, and that threat was something extraterrestrial. While it's easy to take a look at that scene and realize Tony was hinting the name of the fourth Avengers movie, something else significant happens during this scene. Captain America pipes up while Tony is speaking and says that they'll defeat their enemies together. When Tony asks what happens if that doesn't work, he confidently replies that they'll lose together. Tony Stark and Steve Rogers couldn't be more different personality-wise, but they've always had respect and even fondness for one another. Who among us wasn't heartbroken during Captain America's Civil War when Tony said that he thought Steve was his friend? We've seen so many crazy, over-the-top battles in the MCU, but seeing Tony and Steve pummeling each other was just painful to watch. Although Helmut Zemo did succeed in tearing apart the Avengers, there was no doubt that Steve and Tony weren't quite enemies just yet. One thing that Tony and Steve do have in common is that they take being a superhero very seriously, and they put themselves at risk to save others without a second thought. We all know that Endgame is supposed to be a game-changing movie to usher in a new phase of Marvel movies. We'll be getting new characters like Captain Marvel, established character Black Widow is getting her own movie, and things are really getting shaken up. Many fans believe that not all of our beloved heroes will live to see the world past Endgame, and Steve and Tony are frequently mentioned as those who might be sacrificed. Since this Age of Ultron scene hinted at the name of the fourth movie, it's not too crazy to think there may be other clues in here as well. When Steve says that he and Tony will fight together and die together, could this foreshadow that the Avengers could lose both Captain America and Iron Man during Endgame? As much as we hate to say it, this doesn't seem implausible. The Soul Stone is going to demand a sacrifice one way or another, and that's not even taking into account all of the various ways someone could end up losing their life. In addition to all of the changes in the MCU, there's the whole Disney-Fox merger, which means that characters like the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and even Deadpool will likely be incorporated into the universe. Too many characters can put a strain on a movie, we're looking at you, Infinity War, or even a universe. By removing two heavy hitters who have already had their share of standalone movies, it would make way for the deluge of new characters that is on its way. Tony and Steve may end up dying together during Endgame just from a practical standpoint, let alone a story-driven one. There was also one final hint that the movie would be called Endgame, but it wasn't in a movie. The Russo brothers love to tease fans and heighten anticipation, so they released a seemingly innocent photo with the captain. Look hard. After we applied eye drops to our straining eyes, we noticed that it looks like the ladder is in the shape of an A. Now, this speaks to the true determination or desperation of Marvel fans that we immediately decided it was an intentional A and not just the normal shape a ladder makes. Many people believed this indicated that the title of the movie would be Annihilation, but if you look closely, you can see another letter hidden here. If we assume that the ladder represents the letter A, the set piece next to it looks like a slash mark. And then if you look further to the right, the silver part of the chest seems to resemble an E. If you were one of the clever ones, you may have put two and two together and guessed that the AE stood for Avengers Endgame. Sometimes we can guess what comes next by noticing something unusual, but other times it's the absence of something which piques our interest. During Avengers Infinity War, one of the founding members of the Avengers was conspicuously absent from the movie. Previously in the MCU, we learned that Clint Barton, better known as Hawkeye, had retired from the whole superhero thing in order to spend more time with his family. But during Captain America Civil War, we learned that it's not too difficult to persuade him to come out of retirement. All he needs to know is that there's an evil at work and his friends need him. Sure, this gets him into trouble by the end of Civil War, but he's still in fighting shape. Captain America and Black Widow went rogue following the movie, and they still showed up to fight during Infinity War. So why was Hawkeye left out? Was there a scheduling conflict with Jeremy Renner? Or was this just a case of too many characters, and he seemed like the one who could plausibly be left out? These explanations are simple, but too simple for Marvel fans who suspected something was up. In the MCU, we know Clint Barton as Hawkeye, but in the comic books, he also takes on the darker and more somber mantle of Ronin. If Hawkeye was sitting out on the Infinity War, many fans believed there had to be a good reason, and wondered if he had undergone some type of tragedy, or if some situation was preventing him from reporting for duty. In the comics, Clint goes through some heavy times and ends up trading in his beloved bow and arrow for some blades, heading to Japan as Ronin. And it seems like this theory wasn't so far-fetched after all, based on the trailer for Endgame. During one scene, we indeed see Clint looking much different than the last time we saw him, seemingly in Japan, wearing a cloak and wielding a sword. Many thought that thinking Ronin would show up during Endgame was nothing more than wishful thinking, but it turns out to be true. And then we have a clue that few could notice, even in retrospect. During the trailer for Avengers Endgame, who could forget poor Tony Stark aimlessly drifting through space trying to record a message to his beloved Pepper Potts? But did you notice how Tony looked during this scene? No, we are not talking about the fact that he looks spectacular after going without food and water for days on end. Seriously, what's his secret? Anyway, although things look certainly bleak for our hero, he's been in bad situations before, including the very first time we met him in the movie Iron Man. We know it seems like an eternity ago now, but there was a time before the MCU's Tony Stark had donned his Iron Man armor, and he ended up imprisoned by a group of bad guys. During this stressful time, we saw Tony wearing a remarkably similar shirt to the one he's wearing in the Endgame trailer. Now, it could be that Tony just happens to wear a lot of black tank tops, but we don't think it's so simple. It's likely this wardrobe callback was meant to drive home the point that Tony is a prisoner and in a very dangerous situation. When most people think of Thanos, it's easy to picture him tearing his way through the universe like we saw him do during Infinity War. After all, the Mad Titan had been teased for a long time, and we knew he was up to no good. It became clear he would do whatever it takes to get his hands on the Infinity Stones, and wouldn't let anyone stand in his way. But by the end of the movie, he was seemingly less enthusiastic than he once was. Maybe it was watching the loyal members of his Black Order fall in battle one by one, or it could be the fact that he threw his favorite child off a cliff. Being the favorite child of Thanos is a really dubious honor, by the way. Regardless of just what bummed him out so much, the Thanos we saw at the end of Infinity War was very different from the one we'd come to know and fear over the years. When he journeyed into the Soul World and met with painfully cute little Gamora, she asked him what his victory had cost him, to which the Mad Titan replied, everything. Non-comic book fans may have believed that Thanos was exaggerating and would soon pull himself out of this funk, but comic book fans have seen despondent Thanos before, and we knew what came next. If you thought we were joking when we said Thanos was going to follow his actions during Infinity War by becoming a farmer, that joke's on you. We weren't sure if Farmer Thanos was going to make an appearance during Endgame, but the end of Infinity War made us think that it could happen. Now, it seems clear that this was intended to be one of the few parts from the comic books which will be incorporated into the MCU. At least Farmer Thanos is better than the Thanos helicopter. We'll take what we can get at this point. In the comic books, after Thanos collects all of the Infinity Stones and uses them, he gets a bit full of himself. So much so that he ascends to a higher level of being, giving Nebula the chance to steal the Infinity Gauntlet for herself and giving our enemy someone else to fight with. It seems like there aren't any clues in the comics for what'll happen at the conclusion of the Endgame movie, but we're going to read them again just in case. Are you an eagle-eyed Marvel movie fan? Which of your Endgame predictions came true? Are there any details that we may have missed? Share your ideas with us in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more great MCU videos like this one. Thanks for watching.